Okay, we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. To the thousands watching live on Zoom and the millions on YouTube. It's wonderful to have you all here tonight as we continue to plow through Mishnayos. And this week we are going to be taking a look at Eruvin, chapter 4, and hopefully chapter 5. So everybody say ooh. So here we go. We're going to get cracking with chapter 4. We're going to get it up for you on the screen over here. And we're going to get it up for you on the screen over here. So everybody should have it right in front of them. Chapter 4. There we go. Beautiful. Everybody ready? Let's do this thing. So, chapter 4 of Eruvin, where we are talking about this 2,000 amot perimeter, the tchum, around a town, a village, a city, whatever it might be, which a person is not supposed to walk beyond on Shabbos. So we started to talk about it a little bit last week. We're going to talk about it a little bit more tonight. I'm not going to confess or profess to know everything about this topic, but I will certainly do what I can. And the reason why I sometimes get a little bit bamboozled and confused is just because of the way in which you get limited from going one direction, and that impedes your ability to go in another direction. So there is a lot to keep track of with all of this, but I will do my best. So without further ado, let's crack on with chapter 4, Mishnah 1. Mishel tziyuhu goyim or ruach ra. If a person was taken beyond the tchum on Shabbos, either there were some non-Jews that came and took him, or ruach ra, or he had this moment, this lapse in wanting to do the right thing. It translates it here as an evil spirit, but what it means is here that he is, in a moment of madness, he decided to violate this particular law and go beyond the tchum, the boundaries. So the Mishnah says that a person who ends up being outside of the tchum on Shabbos, ein lo ela arba amos, he is only able to move around within the immediate vicinity of where he is. So he can move 6 feet in that direction, 6 feet in that direction, but he's essentially rooted to the spot on account of now being outside of the tchum. Says the Mishnah, Hechaziruhu, if they bring him back in, then Ki'ilu Yotza, then it's as if he never left in the first place, and he regains his rights to move around his town, his city, whatever it is, with freedom. Holichuhu le'eracheres. What if they take him to another town altogether? Or nisanuhu badir, or they put him in a pen, or basahar, some kind of, not prison necessarily, but just an enclosure that he is restricted within. So Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omrim mahaleches kula. Then he is allowed to move freely throughout these spaces. Rabbi Yehoshua v'Rabbi Akiva omrim, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva say, Ein lo ela arba amos. No, because he has now gone beyond where he was originally at the start of Shabbos, he now only has 4 amos, 4 cubits in which to move. Maaseh shabo miprandisin. There was a story where they were coming from Prandisin, which apparently translates there as Brindisi, but it appears to be in southeast Italy. So they were coming on a boat, and the ship was sailing out to sea. But the implication here is that it was drifting beyond more than 2,000 amos out to sea. So Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, hilchu es kula. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah moved freely around the boat. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva lo zazu me'arba amos shiratzu lachmir alatzman. But the other 2 rabbis decided to stay only within their daled amos, their 6 feet around them, because they wanted to be stringent upon themselves. Although, so that was their position when they were on this ship, and that would be consistent with what we had seen in the Mishnah, but it's not universally agreed upon. Moving on to Mishnah base. There could be issues with getting off the boat. So the Mishnah says, there was one time where they only came into the harbor when it had already become dark, when it was already Shabbos. They asked Rabban Gamliel, are we allowed to get off the boat? Are we allowed to disembark? He replied, yep, you are allowed to get off the boat. Because I already saw while we were traveling, just as Shabbos was coming in, the Gemara apparently says he had a telescope, but he saw while he was already on the boat, just as Shabbos was coming in, that we were within 2,000 amos of the shore before Shabbos came in. And so because they were within 2,000 amos of the border that they were approaching, they were allowed to move freely and disembark from the boat and move freely once they were on dry land, because according to Rabban Gamliel, he had seen that they were already within the Tchum when Shabbos was coming in. Moving on to Mishnah Gimel, Mishiat Sabir Shus V'amru Lo. So a person who went beyond the boundaries with permission, he, for example, he might have been traveling to be able to testify about the new month, which one was allowed to travel for on Shabbos. So Kfar Nasa Maseh, if he has now completed his mission, if he finds that the mission has already been completed, so either people had already gone to testify about the new moon, or one of the other examples brought is that somebody needed to be saved from drowning in a river, or because they've been captured by non-Jewish people, whatever it is. So if you find out that the crisis has been averted, or the mission has already been accomplished, says the Mishnah, Yesh lo alpayim amal chol ruach. He doesn't get frozen where he is. He now has 2,000 amos to move around in any direction. Im haya b'toch tchum, and if he was still within the 2,000 amot perimeter of his town or city, ki'ilu lo yatzab, and it's as if he hasn't left at all. Shekol hayotzim lahatzil chozin l'mekon, because anybody who goes out to save life, as we said, somebody might be drowning, or someone might have been captured, or they might be on this mission to testify about the new month. So anybody who goes out for one of these things on Shabbos is nonetheless able to return on Shabbos back to their original place. Mishnah Daled. If Shabbos commences when he was within 2,000 amos of the city, then he can acquire residence and establish that town, that city is going to be where he spends his Shabbos, and so he would acquire the full rights to the Tchum. But the question is, what if he only finds out after Shabbos has started and he realizes where he is? So the Mishnah says as follows, Mishnah Dalet, Mishnah 4. Mishi Yoshav Baderech. One is sitting down while going along the way on the road, Va'omad, and he stands up when it's now Shabbos, V'ra'ah, and he sees, V'harehu Samech La'ir, that he's actually in proximity to a town. Since it had not been his intention to establish his Shabbos dwelling in that place on Shabbos, the Mishnah says, Lo yikanes, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir's opinion is that he should not enter. Not meaning that he can't go into the town. Certainly if he's within the Tchum, he's entitled to. But what he means is that he doesn't get the full traveling rights of a resident of the town. He doesn't then acquire the 2,000 amot perimeter to be able to move around freely like a resident of the town. Rabbi Yehuda, no, you can't. Rabbi Yehuda says he can. He does get it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, it actually happened to Rabbi Tarfon, who came in, he realized that Shabbos was upon him, he was within proximity to a town, He hadn't planned to be there for Shabbos, but he was able to walk into town, and he was able also to get the rights of the other residents to be able to move around. In Mishnah Hay, we talk about somebody who's similar kind of situation, but he's fallen asleep before Shabbos. Mish yashan baderech, he falls asleep while he's on the way. V'lo yadash shechashecha, doesn't realize that Shabbos has already come in. Says the Mishnah, yesh lo alpayim amo l'chol ruach. Then he has 2,000 amos in every direction. Divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, v'chachamim omrim ein lo ela arba amos. The chachamim say that he only gets 4 amos to be able to move around. Rabbi Eliezer says, v'hu be'ensan. Rabbi Eliezer is even more strict. Not only that you have 4 amos to move around, but actually you are in the middle of those 4 amos. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you actually only have 2 amos in every direction, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yehuda says, L'eza ruach shirtza yelech. Rabbi Yehuda says, whichever direction he wants to move in, he's entitled to do so. Umode Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees, but if he's chosen a direction, he's now not able to change his mind and decide to get the leniencies of going in the other direction as well. So really kind of heavy restrictions that get placed in those kinds of situations. Please God, if we fall asleep on the journey, we won't have to worry about such things, and we'll just always be in the comfort of where we need to be before Shabbos, and not have to face these issues necessarily ourselves. But it used to get exciting when I lived in Manchester, and I mean it's related to this, but not directly so. But we'd occasionally get these phone calls moments before Shabbos of people that were going up to visit relatives, and they couldn't get to North Manchester in time for Shabbos, and they had no choice but to cut their journey short and plonk themselves in hail for Shabbos. So sometimes we'd get a phone call, sometimes I'd arrive in shul and there'd be someone completely random who was essentially stranded in our community over Shabbos because they couldn't get to their relatives or their friends in North Manchester. It's always a lot of fun. Anyway, we move on to Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. Here we go. Hayu Shnayim. We've got 2 people. Miktsas amosav shel zeh b'sach amosav shel zeh. And what we're finding is, if we can picture in our minds, I think the easiest diagram that we might be able to help paint the picture is like a Venn diagram of overlapping circles. So let's see how we do with this one. This was one of the tricky ones. So you've got 2 men who have got their perimeters around them. And what we're finding is that the radii of their perimeters are crossing over. So there is some shared space between the spaces that they are having to occupy on Shabbos. So the Mishnah says, Mixas amosav shazeh b'soch amosav shazeh. Some of this guy's 3 amot space are overlapping with another guy's amot space. Says the Mishnah Mavin v'ochlim be'emsa. They are able to sit together and share their food and eat in the middle. But as long as they don't carry beyond their thresholds into the threshold of the other person. That is when you have 2 people. If you have 3 people, so the middle guy is sharing perimeter space with the 2 outer guys, but the outer guys, the periphery people, are not sharing any common ground with each other. So you've got 3 people. The middle one is the one that is able to occupy both of their perimeters. So the Mishnah says, "Hu mutai mahem." He is allowed to eat with either of them, to engage, as it were, with either of them. They are able to eat with him. But the 2 outer people are forbidden to exchange in this way. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, what is this comparable to? Says the Mishnah, Lishlosh chatzeros hapsuchim zu lezu. It's comparable to when you have 3 courtyards that are opening into each other. So let's say we've got courtyard 1, 2, and 3, where you can essentially work through each 3 of the courtyard spaces, but they're also all opening out onto the Rishus HaRabim, the Suchos, the Rishus HaRabim. They're all opening up onto the public domain. So the Mishnah says, Eruvu shteihem im ha'ensa'is. If the 2 courtyards on either side have made an Eruv with the middle one, then then the occupants of the central courtyard are able to interact with the courtyards on either side, and they are allowed to interact with the middle one. But the 2 periphery ones are unable to interact in that same way and literally cross right through from one to the other. If they had only made the Eruv with the central courtyard. So I hope that is somewhat clear. And if it's not, good luck. Mishnah Zayin says the 7th Mishnah. Where are we at with the 7th Mishnah? We've got a guy who is within 2,000 amot of his current position, and he could get there before Shabbos if he runs, but he's tired, so he doesn't want to run. So let's see what that comes to tell us. Mi shababa derech v'chash chalo. Someone who's going on the journey and it becomes dark. V'hayam makir ilan or gader, and he recognizes a tree or a fence in the distance. So he says, he realizes that tree or that fence is within the tchum of his house. So he says, I want that to be where I'm spending Shabbos, or where I want to reach by Shabbos. But he's not there yet when Shabbos is coming in. Lo amar klum, says the first position in the Mishnah. He has not accomplished anything by saying this. Continues the Mishnah, Shavisasi ba'ikara. I want my dwelling over Shabbos to be at the root of that tree. So the Mishnah says, Mahalech mimakom raglav va'adikara alpain ama. So he is allowed to move from where he is at this point if Shabbos comes in, 2,000 amos, as long as he can get to the tree within 2,000 amos. Then he can go 2,000 amos to get to the roots of the tree. And then from the roots of the tree to his house, he also has alpain ama, because he had designated the tree as being where he was going to occupy space on Shabbos. So it would seem to say that the tree is going to be his yardstick. That's not definitive and that's not clear enough. It doesn't define his position accurately enough. But apparently the roots of the tree does define his position accurately enough. And therefore, he gets the 2,000 amos to the tree and then the 2,000 amos to his home. So finishes the Mishnah. So we find that somebody can actually walk in this kind of situation. Once it's dark, he can walk 4,000 amos back to his house. Continuing with Mishnah Ches, if he does not recognize any landmarks ahead of him, or he is not an expert, or he is not familiar enough with the halachas, so he says, may this place where I am now be my dwelling place for Shabbos. So he acquires that point, and he acquires the right of movement for 2,000 amos in every direction. It says the Mishnah though, Agulos, divrei Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos. Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos defines this clearly for us and says that what we're talking about is a circle perimeter of 2,000 amos in every direction. What else could it be? Well, Chachamim Merubars. The Chachamim say actually it's a square perimeter of 2,000 amos. Katabla Merubars, like a square tablet. Kadesh Yehei Niskal Zavios. And so actually by doing that, you gain a little bit extra from the corner, because for those of us who are familiar enough with mathematics and geometry, if it is geometry, I think it's geometry, trigonometry, whatever it is. So if you have a square with 2,000 amos in each direction, what you'll end up with to the corners is a longer distance. Consult Pythagoras for all further information. Continuing with Mishnah Tess. Says the Mishnah, next page. V'zohi sha'amro, and this is what the rabbis were saying when they said He'ani me'arev b'raglav, that a poor person makes his eruv with his feet, meaning that he's not making it with food because it's too poor to afford food. So the Chachamim say that an ani is actually acquiring this ability to move around with just with his legs alone, and since he is like a poor person now, moving around on Shabbos without anything, any of his amenities or his conveniences, he's like a poor person, and he is able to move around just by that right alone. Amar Rabbi Meir says, Anu ein lanu ela ani. Rabbi Meir says this can only apply if he is a poor person. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, echad ani ve'echad ashir. Rabbi Yehuda says, whether he's an actual poor person, whether he's an actual rich person, it would still apply. Lo amru ma'arvim b'pas ela lahakil al hayashir shelo yitzei v'yarev b'raglav. The only reason why they insisted that Eruvin be prepared with bread is in order to make it easier for a rich person, so that he doesn't have to go and make the effort to walk around and acquire his perimeter with his feet. So there we go, an interesting point as well in Mishnah Tess. Continuing with Mishnah Yud, talking about a person who is an agent for a lot of people in the city, and acquiring this tachum on the behalf of other people. Somebody who left to go to a town, Shema Eruvin Ba, where there is an eruv that connects them, and a friend of his brings him back. He is allowed to walk around in the other town, but all the other townspeople are forbidden. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he acquired residence for himself with his feet, but he never did it for anybody else. Rabbi Meir says, Kol sheyachol la'arev v'lo erev, harei zeh chamar gamal. Rabbi Meir says that that actually a shliach can lose out in this fashion, because Rabbi Meir says that if the person was in the situation of being able to provide an eruv, and or to prepare an eruv, and he neglected to do so, so he becomes like this chamar gamal. He is losing out in both directions. If you recall, we've had this terminology before of the camel driver who's having to pull along, and the donkey driver who's being pulled along, and so he's kind of torn between two instances where he can't move as freely as he would like. He can only move make use of the eruv in one direction. So he loses that freedom, whereas others may have had it. Finishing the perek with Mishnah Yud Aleph, Mishnah 11. What if a person walks more than 2,000 amas outside of the tachum of the city? A person who exceeds the perimeter, afilu ama achas, even if he only goes 1 amma further, says the Mishnah, lo yikanes, he may not come back in. So you lose that flexibility. So continues the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says, Shtayim yikanes, shalosh lo yikanes, a bit more lenient. Rabbi Eliezer says if you exceed the perimeter by 2 amos, he may re-enter, but if he exceeds it by 3 amos, he may not. If a person is outside of the tachum when Shabbos comes in, afilu ama achas, even if he's only 1 amma outside of the perimeter, lo yikanes, he may not come back in. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, afilu 15 amos yikanes. Even if he is 15 amos outside of the tachum, he may re-enter. Why is that? I hear you cry. And that is because the way in which they used to measure out these boundaries is that they would only measure out to an extremity of 1,885 amos. In order that if a person reaches the Tchum and sees how it's been marked, and they're there, then at least they realize, okay, there's a bit of a buffer zone to make sure that people really don't go beyond the Tchum. And so, actually, according to Rabbi Shimon, you get 15 amos. Because actually, the people who were, they translated here as the surveyors, but the Eruv builders were not exact with the measurement in order to allow a bit of a buffer zone for people who were making the error in that way. So that is why Rabbi Shimon says you get a bit of extra space. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing chapter 4, on completing Perek Dalet. And here we go with Perek Hey, talking about, again, the outermost point of the city. Where exactly is it? So, Ketzad Ma'abrin Es Te'arim. How do we measure the city? What we find is that as long as there's a certain distance between the next available house, the confines or the size of the city can actually expand depending on where houses are located. It's not always so straightforward that a town or a city is in a simple square shape or in a simple circle shape or whatever it is. You sometimes, as you go along, get different houses that are part of the town, but a little bit out there on their own. And it seems that as long as there's not more than 70 2/3, 70.6 amos to the next house, the city actually extends to those houses, which is where we would then start counting the 2,000 amot tchum. So says the Mishnah, Bais nichnas, bais yotze. You can have houses jutting out of this perimeter. One could be in, one could be out. Pagum nichnas, pagum yotze. Or you can have, it translates it here as a turret. You could have bits of the perimeter, or if we imagine a wall going around the perimeter of the town, so you could have different towers and different parts that are jutting in and jutting out. Continues the Mishnah. If you have walls that are 10 tefachim high, ugasharim unafashos, or you have bridges, or you have, I have it translated here as cemeteries. They have it translated here on the screen as sepulchral monuments. But if you have any of these things, sheyesh bahem beis dira, that they have within them a dwelling place, then motziin es amida kenegdan. So then these two will extend the perimeter of the city space. Va'osin osa kamin tabla merubas kedei sheheniskar es hazaviyot. And again, they will make the tchum, they will make the limit, the perimeters, into a square, so that you benefit, you gain from the extra space in the corners of the square. But what we're doing over here is we are just expanding the size of the actual town in accordance with where these dwelling places are located. Says Mishnah base, Nosnin Karpef La'ir, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that before you even get to the Tchum part, you actually have a perimeter of 70 and a bit amos, the size of a karpaf, or a karpef. You have that as your starting point, but before you even get to the 2,000 amos in question, they say you don't have the first 70 and a bit amos, ela bein shtei ayaros, im yesh lazor shivim amma v'shirayim, v'lazor shivim amma v'shirayim, ose karpaf l'shtein liyosen ke'achas. But they do say that where you have two towns who are within close proximity with each other, such that there's a perimeter of 17 a bit before you would then reach the 17 a bit of the next town, according to the Chachamim, it would actually combine them into one large living space, which would then free up the freedom of movement to move between these two towns. Mishnah Gimel. If you have three villages in the shape of a triangle, so you've got city 1 or village 1 over there in one corner, and village 2 in the next corner, and then down here you have village 3, very interesting thing happens. So if you have as a gap between them 141 amos and a third, then what happens is then actually the third one, which is in the middle, will achieve this big perimeter merging, such that all three of these towns or all three of these villages will now be connected. So somehow this third one magically moves up as if it's in between the two peripheral ones, such that you now have 70 and a bit in between village A to the middle one and village B to the middle one, right? Because that combined space is not wider than the amount of space to have the middle one connect them. According to the Chachamim, you will be connected. How amazing is that? You can see just how complex this stuff is. And I'm definitely not proficient in the laws of Eruvin, but it is very, very interesting to see how you're able to connect all these things together and piece it in that way. All right, Mishnah Daled, Tachlis. How are we actually measuring this Tchum? Says the Mishnah. The way they did it was like this. They had a rope, a linen rope, which was 50 amos long. Lo pachos velo yoser. It was not less than 50 amos, and it was not more than 50 amos. Velo yimdod ela keneged libo. And they would have two guys who would hold either end, and they would hold the rope in line with their hearts, with their chests. Haya moded v'higia legai or legader. If they were measuring and they reached a valley or they reached a wall, mavlio v'chozel midasa. So they might have to adjust where they're holding things to try and keep it all straight. So one guy might be holding it up there while the other guy is holding it against his chest, but because of the elevation, it means that the measurement is being kept in a straight line. So as long as you're doing that, you are okay. And once you bypass the obstacle, then you just lower it back to chest height. Higia lahar mavlio v'chozel midas. Similarly, if you reach a hill or a let's keep it as a hill. Why not? That's what they translate it over there as. So again, you swallow it up. You adjust it so that you are keeping the length of the rope in a straight line, and that's how you measure it. And then once you are bypassing this obstacle, then you keep it flat again. You return to normal. As long as you are not going beyond the tchum. If you are not able to do it in this way, then Bazo Amar Rabbi Dostai bar Rabbi Yanai Mishum Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Dostai bar Rabbi Yanai, the son of Rabbi Yanai, said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Shamati Shemikadrim Beharim. So he says that what you have to do is you have to pierce the hills, which doesn't mean that you have to make a tunnel, but I think what it means is you somehow make the adjustment and just kind of imagine what it would be like if you were boring straight through the hill, and that's how far you can be measuring with. Continuing with Mishnah Hay. Ein modin ela min mimcha. Really, the tchum should only be measured by experts. Rila b'makom echad u'miyat l'makom acher. If he extends the limit at one point and limits it in another, shomin l'makom shuriba. Then they should observe in the place where it has been extended. If there was one who made it a meaning, if you've got one expert who's saying one thing and one expert who's saying the other thing, so you always go with the more lenient expert. And the reason is that because we're dealing with dinin d'Rabbanan, rabbinic inactions, rabbinic rulings, so the purpose of this tikkun is to be lenient. So if you've got one guy saying that it's this far, one guy saying it's a bit less far, so then you observe to the further expert. Where are we? You got one who made it longer, one who made it lesser. Shomim l'marba. We listen to the one who made it the greater distance. Afilu eved, even a slave. Afilu shifra, even a maidservant. They're manin lomar ad kan tchum Shabbos. You can even trust a slave or a maidservant to say, I'm aware that this is where the Tchum of Shabbos is. Because again, the only reason this is in place is to be a leniency, is to ease the restrictions for people rather than to make it harder, which is, again, contextually, that's a wonderful thing to see included. In Mishnah Vav, we actually digress to talk about Eruv Chatzeros. We've been talking about Eruv Tchumin, the boundaries of a Tchum, of the 2,000 Amos, and we actually digress slightly here to talk about courtyards, an Eruv for a courtyard. Says the Mishnah, Ir Shel Yachid, if you have got a town that is owned by one really, really rich guy, and he rents out all the properties to other people. So you've got an Ir Shel Yachid, the Nases Shel Rabin, and it gets converted into a town belonging to many people. Says the Mishnah Eruvin es Kula. So then you can make an Eruv for the entire town. Says the Mishnah Shel Rabin, the Nases Shel Yachid. If you have a town that belongs to many people, but it gets converted into a town that becomes under the ownership of one person, Ein Ma'arvin es Kula. They may not make an Eruv for the entire town, unless they designate an area, to be excluded. How big is this? It is to be the size of the town of Chadasha. I believe that's the name of the town. Chadasha Shebeyehuda. Chadasha, which is in the region of Yehuda in Judea. Sheyesh ba 50 diurim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to exclude a chunk of the town that contains 50 residents in it. And the reason is because if I have a note here, if it's publicly owned, you can't make an Eruv Chatzeros for everyone. There always has to be an area that is excluded, that is left out. Why that is because what we're afraid of is that the laws of public domains, private domains, etc., and carrying in between would just be forgotten if you went willy-nilly and just included everything in the Eruv. And for that reason, there has to be a point at which the Eruv stops in order that the concept of carrying and transferring on Shabbos does not get forgotten. So Rabbi Yehuda says there has to be a chunk that contains within it at least 50 residents, has to be excluded from the general Eruv. Rabbi Shimon says, Shalosh Chatzeros shel shnei batim. Smaller size, 3 courtyards, each of which contains 2 houses. So only 6 houses would have to be excluded, according to Rabbi Shimon. All right, we continue with Mishnah Zion. Says the Mishnah, Mishahaya b'mizrach, a person is on the east side, va'amar livno arav li b'marav, and he asks his son to go and prepare an Eruv on the west side. B'marav va'amar livno, or he lives on the west side and he asks his son, arav li b'mizrach, please prepare an Eruv for me on the east side. Im yesh heimenu leveso alpaim amos, if there is between him and his house 2,000 amos, v'le'eravo yoser mikan, and between him and his Eruv there is more than this, mutar lebeso v'asur le'eruvo. So he's permitted to go to his house, and he's forbidden to go to his Eruv because his Eruv is already 2,000 plus amos from where he is supposed to be moving from. But if from where he is in point A, to get to his Eruv is less than 2,000 amos, but to get to his house is more than 2,000 amos, so then he is able to go to his Eruv, but he's not able to go to his house. If he puts his Eruv in the Ibura Shal'ir, in this 70 amos extension buffer zone as it's reaching the next house, if he leaves his Eruv there, lo asa v'lo klum, he has not won any, he's not gained anything, he has not now extended his 2,000 amos even further. The son of Chutzlot Tchum Afilu Ama Achas Mashaniskar Hu Mafsid, says the Mishnah that if he puts the Eruv even one Amma outside of the Tchum, so even though he might gain amos, 4 amos on one side, he loses out on the other side. Quite how to picture this diagrammatically, I think what it means is that going the other direction, he doesn't now keep his perimeter in the other direction. I think it's limited in that regard. Even if he gains a little something by having his Eruv on that side in front of him, in the end he doesn't really gain as much as he does. Quite why that is, I'm a very visual person and I don't have anything visual in front of me to help me really picture this Mishnah. Alright, so we'll move on to Mishnah Ches. Mishnah 8. Anshe ir gedola mahalchin es kol ir katana. The people of a large town may walk through the whole of a small town. Why would they be able to do this? Because they have a small town that is within 2,000 amos of their big town, so they can move freely into that small town. But, says the Mishnah, vein anshe ir katana mahalchin es kol ir gedola. But the people of the small town, the residents of the small town, are not able to walk through the whole of the large town. Asks the Mishnah, Ketzad, Misha haya be'ir gedola, if a person is in a large town, v'nasan es eruva be'ir katana, and he puts his Eruv in the small town, or be'ir katana v'nasan es eruva be'ir gedola, or a person in a small town puts his Eruv, his loaf of bread or whatever, in the Ir gedola, says the Mishnah, mahalech es kula, then they are allowed to walk through the entirety of that town, and then 2,000 amos from the extremity of that next town. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva says that they can only move 2,000 amos from the place where they have put their Eruv. So that might even be within the big town that they've moved into. You only get 2,000 amos from that point. But the halacha seems to be like the first position in the Mishnah. All right, finally, Mishnah Test, the final Mishnah of the 5th chapter, the 5th perek, says the Mishnah. Amar lahem Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to them, this is following on already from what we've just said. Don't you agree with me that one who puts an Eruv inside of a cave, that from the point of where he leaves his food inside this cave, that he only gets a perimeter of 2,000 amos from the place of his Eruv. Amrullah, Emasai. When is that the case? Bisman she'ein badiurin. That's only if there are no people dwelling in the cave. Aval, yesh badiurin. But if there are people dwelling, mahalich es kula v'chutzala alpayim amma. So you would get the entire size of the cave, plus you would get 2,000 amos beyond that point of the cave. So what you actually find is nimtza kal tocha me'al gaba. You would find, therefore, that it's better off having the Eruv inside the cave rather than outside the cave. Now, diagrammatically, I can picture this, so allow me to explain what this means. Let's say you have a point where if you're on the top of the ground, you're able to put your Eruv on that spot. But if you were to go underneath the ground, you would see that you actually got a cave under there. Yeah? And if you have a loaf of bread, your Eruv, inside that cave, essentially in the same vertical coordinate from the ground level, so you actually get a wider perimeter by putting it in the cave. Because what you get is, you get the rights to the entire space of the cave, which at ground level may be further away from where you are looking to put your Eruv. And from that point, you now have 2,000 amos. Whereas if you put it on ground level, you will only get 2,000 amos from that point. And you won't get to include the cavernous cave space that is lurking underneath. So that is why, according to the Chachamim, if you've got people dwelling in the cave, you actually stand to gain by putting the loaf of bread, by putting the Eruv inside the cave, because you get the whole space of the cave and the equivalent airspace, ground space above it. And from the external dimensions of the cave, even at ground level, then you would get 2,000 amos spread out from there. Finishes the Mishnah of Lamoded, She'amru nosnin lo alpayim, and to the measurer, to the measurer of whom they spoke, that they give 2,000 amos, she'afilu sof midas or kale b'mara. They give, what are we saying over here? To the measure who says that you give them 2,000 amos, she'afilu sof midas or kale b'mara, even if the end of his measure terminates within a cave. But they do seem to agree, however, that somebody coming from the outside who puts down his Eruv in a city or in a livable cave, so you get 2,000 amos from that point. Okay, that bit I didn't get as well, but there we go. All right. That's what we'll leave it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Further research required on all sides. Shekoyach, one and all. That's all we will do this week. We will pick it up from chapter 6 next week. Have a wonderful and meaningful evening.